Hello to the 5 people watching, welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna talk about why we hate jobs. Well, let's talk about first the history of working. Ever since the Stone Age, but definitely in the medieval times, in medieval Europe, people liked to work in a certain rhythm, in small bursts. It would be slow working, then followed by fast working. So what do I mean by that? Well, Monday to Tuesday were known as slow days, while Thursday and Friday were known as fast days. Saturday was payday. Thus, people used to say, let's work fast, let's get this task done so we can get paid. Time used to also be measured by tasks rather than hour, because, well, clocks weren't available like they are today. People would say 1 day away riding, 2 days away riding, and so on. Again, this was because clocks wasn't a thing, not available. When we talk about working, we have to think about the fact that when we say working, mostly it was basically in agriculture. Most of the work was done in agriculture, and working day meant basically you spending the time in the fields working. People would tend to trickle in the morning to work. It wasn't an exact set time. People would show up, then they would grab something to eat. By the way, the employer would provide food, so they would turn up to work, they would trickle in, they would grab something to eat and, you know, chat, and they would talk to one another for a while. That was before they started working. And a lot of employers were actually complaining of the fact that it was hard sometimes to get all the people, to get them to start working. And they would work for a couple of hours, and mid-morning they would take a break. This would be a 30 to 60 minutes break. They would grab something to eat and go back to work. At noon they would take another break. This was a more extended break where they would have a larger meal, what we call today lunch, and they would have a nap. Yes, people used to nap at work. After that, they were obviously re-energized, rejuvenated, and they would go back to work. And they would work at a faster pace, and they were more productive. Sometimes people would finish working in early afternoon, and if they finished working whatever they were supposed to do that day, by early afternoon they would just go home. They wouldn't continue working. If they wouldn't finish the task that they had for the day, they would have another break. Again, 30 to 60 minutes, they would grab something to eat, and then would go back to work until late afternoon. Workers would spend somewhere in around 8 hours at work, but if you account for the breaks, they would actually work for anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. During the harvest season, this would be around 12 hours per day. But again, accounting for the breaks, that would mean anywhere between 7 to 9 hours of work. And they would sometimes work until evenings. There was another extensive break in the evening with another meal, again provided by the employer, what we call today dinner. On average, the working day was about 4 to 6 hours. During harvest, people would work longer hours, but they really didn't like it when they had to do so. Sometimes there were also emergencies when they had to work extra hours per day, but again, people really didn't like doing that. The rhythm was anywhere between 4 hours to 6 hours. People were most productive if they work in that kind of rhythm. Work also happened only during daytime. and it would last about, it's not an exact science, but it would last anywhere to and about 50% of the daylight hours available. Work, it wasn't only work. It was a lot more laid back. It was a lot more casual. There was, I guess, in a social aspect when it came to work, it wasn't the robotic thing that we have today. It was a lot more chill. There was no stress related work. Only if there was some kind of an emergency, and even if there was, it wouldn't last that long. People used to be a lot more focused on having a roof over your head, well, food and clothing. The moment they had that, they would prefer spending a lot more of their time, family, friends, doing stuff at home, improving your house or working on your house. Most people today, if they would have a chance between taking more time off work or getting more money to work more, a lot of them would choose to have more time off work. But the moment you do that, if that's even possible by today's system, but let's say it is some kind of a loophole, normally what happens is you will be professionally penalized, marginalized, outright fired. Why? Well, because the system is built against you. People used to have, and I know this is going to be crazy, but peasants in medieval Europe used to have a lot more time off than people having today, modern times. And I'll give you an example. Anywhere from 33% time off during the year, this was England, to all the way to 49% time off, which was France. And the only reason the English had only 33% is not because they were, more productive or they liked working more. It was because the English nobility were, let's say, more exploitative. The English workers were being more exploited by the English nobility. In order for people in modern days to get the amount of time off people got in the Middle Ages, if they would have, on top of the weekends and the holidays they have during the whole year, they should have another 3 to 3.5 months off per year, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, right? You would always expect that peasants during medieval Europe worked a lot harder than we are today, but it's not actually true. Not only that, but there used to be what they called winter wages, or periods throughout the year that work would slow down. And those periods were Easter, late June, and Christmas. So those 3 times per year, work really used to slow down, which means people would sleep more, they would get up later during the day, and they would work less, especially during the winter. By the way, out of these 3 periods, the only one that actually survived the modern age is the Christmas period. They got rid of the other 2. They are encroaching on that one as well. So what happened? How did everything change? Well, it's not a clear answer to that question, but probably started with the introduction of the clock. Just to mention something, remember when I said how time was measured at the beginning? Also, people got paid by the day. Didn't get paid by the hour, you got paid per day. And today you get paid by the hour. Also important, and I'll explain why. So the first thing that changed was the introduction of the clock. The mechanical clocks started to be built pretty early, and they were mostly built, well, in churches, right? Clock towers throughout Europe. And the first business, however, to actually get a clock at the workplace was in the Netherlands. I believe was when they built the stock exchange. Yeah, It was when they built the stock exchange in 1611, and then it became fashionable. And what happened is a lot of businesses throughout Europe started putting a clock at work, and they explained the reason why. Well, to keep the workers in check, because they weren't showing up at the right time, they weren't working as much as they were supposed to do, and they said that in order for business to be more productive, they had to introduce the clock at work. Of course, this happened in cooperation with the government. Once that was the norm and clocks were almost everywhere at work, they also introduced the bell. They made it in such a way that the bell was ringing when the workday was starting, and it was also ringing when the workday was ending. But people weren't used to that, and people just ignored it at the beginning. And it got to a point where, because people were ignoring, especially at the beginning of the day, and they weren't coming at work on time, people started getting fined. So you would be late for work for 1 minute, and because of that you wouldn't get paid for that day, which was a first. Again, this was done in cooperation with the government. But businesses got more and more power, and they started eroding more and more of the culture that was around when you come to working. They were working more hours, you have less breaks. All the holidays, they slowly got rid of them over time. But not only that, some companies even started corrupting the clock, so to speak, which means they had people come and modify the clock they had at work, that they used to obviously count the time that people used to look at when they come into work. They will modify the time in a way that people would have to work more. So let's say everybody was supposed to come to work at 7 o'clock, and the time was 7 o'clock. They would put the time forward to make you think that you were late, so you get fined, so you won't get paid. And some businesses went further. Some businesses, what they did was hire people to come and mess with the clock, so the clock would stop throughout the day whilst people were working. And then where they were going on break, the clock would move faster, so it would catch up with the real time. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. And there was a case particularly, I think it was in England, when people got word of it, and there was a huge scandal. It even went all the way and it was debated in Parliament, but nothing came out of it. And the people who were talking about it at work, they got fired. And so businesses got more and more and more powerful in relation with the working man. But then something happened. The watch, the old school watch, was invented. A small enough watch that you can carry with you. As soon as that happened, they brought their clock to work. When they compared it with the one that their employer was using at work, they realized that they were getting scammed. And guess what happened then? Well, yeah, businesses started putting rules in place that if you would bring your clock with you at work, you would get fired. So you weren't allowed to clock your own time. And businesses went from, hey, we need to introduce the clock, to better manage our workers. And they're basically, which is ironic, they were the ones stealing from the workers. They were the ones who modified clocks to make the workers work more. But then artificial lighting came. When that was introduced, well, shifts began from, remember when I said there were 4 to 6 hours per day? You used to have now 12-hour shifts. Countries started to industrialize faster, especially in Europe, especially Britain. You had artificial lighting, and shifts all of a sudden became 12 hours per day, sometimes even more, 14 hours, depending on what industry you worked in. And slowly, the working man lost all power. We got to the day, which is the day where you work a dead-end job. Businesses who most of the time, they don't care about their workers, which is the truth. Even though they have HR departments to make it seem like you're not a number on a spreadsheet. But let me tell you, as somebody who used to be in management, that's exactly where you are. You're just a number on a spreadsheet, and you're stressed. Work-related stress is now through the roof. Businesses are a lot more controlling. Burnout, it's a real thing. People can't keep jobs because they get overly stressed. And I'll give you an example. In a job that I previously had where I was a manager, a senior manager came to me and told me that basically a member of my team was by the clock out machine 5 minutes before clock out time. And I believe the rule was they were supposed to be by the clock out machine not earlier than 3 minutes before clock out. So I had to go and ask that particular person, what did they do for the 2 minutes that they weren't? Why they were 2 minutes earlier at the clock out machine? Now imagine that conversation. And by the way, because I remember this case, this person wasn't particularly somebody who would, you had KPIs at work to measure how productive we are. This person was really one of the people who were pretty productive in terms of KPI, and I still had to have that kind of conversation with them. That's how bad it became. So this is where we are. Conclusion of the video is this. We went from doing work that was about 4 to 6 hours per day, with many breaks, with food paid by the employer. Employers slowly stopped paying for your food, they stopped paying for your break. You have less breaks. We used to have 1 hour break. Now most places do half an hour break. You used to get paid 8 hours per day, but now they don't even pay the half an hour, so you get paid 7.5 hours per day. So we went for 4 to 6 hours per day to almost having to work like a robot. There's no more leisure aspect or social aspect, I guess, to work. Oh, there's another thing I didn't mention. You can't even talk at work anymore. This was frowned upon, depending on the jobs, of course. But you had to go tell people because they talk to each other, which is, again, insane. I don't care if they talk to each other. Do they do their job? Yeah. Do they match? Do they reach their KPI? Yes. I don't care. They can talk. But that's where we are. And people just got tired of it. We're just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's why we hate jobs. So we should do anything we can to avoid them for as long as possible and spend our time doing things that we like doing. Well, that's it, I think, for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.